We're really glad to have you here with us today. We are using Zoom, as you can tell, in the bottom of the screen. You'll be able to click Q&A to ask questions, and we'll have a team member responding to some of the questions, and then some of them we'll be holding for a later time while we do Q&A with all of the panelists. And you can feel free to use the chat to engage with other participants and the facilitators. We're really excited to hear your questions and any thoughts that you may like to add on the chat. We start our webinars with a land acknowledgement. Our team member is going to drop a link in the chat in which you can go to and check where you're currently at in terms of what land you're currently occupying. And so if you could please go to nativeland.ca and plug in where you're at and just put in the chat what land you're occupying, we would greatly appreciate it. As a practice, we encourage folk to learn more about the original stewards of the land that you're on. It's something that we find very important. And as we are continuing to learn more about how to be better allies to Native people, we want to learn how to make land acknowledgements more impactful. I would like to acknowledge that we're gathering on stolen occupied land. Our society and our racial hierarchy in the United States are literally built upon stolen indigenous land, broken treaties with indigenous nations, and domination over Native people on Turtle Island. This map shows imperialist colonization worldwide from the 1490s onto today, which led to the displacement of millions of indigenous people, amongst other things. I am currently, next slide, please, Emmy. I am tuning in as a settler in the Kingdom of Hawaii, and I would like to take a few minutes to tell you more about the history of Hawaii, as well as some of the issues that are currently plaguing Native Hawaiians, some of the current struggles that they're facing. Hawaii is an indigenous land whose original people are identified as the Kanaka Oiwi or Kanaka Maoli, what we know as Native Hawaiians. Her Majesty Queen Lili Uokalani was kidnapped and forced by American military as well as American businessmen. The American military was working on behalf of American businessmen and kidnapped the queen and kept her captive for over 7 months. During that time, her subjects tried to free her. The subjects were held captive as well, and under threat of death, the queen was forced to give the territory to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people. The Kanaka Maoli have opposed the overthrow of their kingdom from the beginning, since 1893. No native vote in Hawaii was ever taken on annexation, nor was any vote ever envisioned. In the 1900s, Hawaii became officially American property, which led to a military occupation that continues to this day. The Hawaiian sovereignty movement views both the overthrow and the annexation as illegal. And in 1993, the United States Congress acknowledged that the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii was an illegal act. In the United States, Hawaiians remain excluded from US domestic policy, which provides some Native American and Alaska Natives with a limited amount of rights to self-determination. Hawaiians don't have any of those rights. And so this has led to a number of issues. Next, please, Emmy. So the theft of the Hawaiian kingdom happened 129 years ago. For reference, the oldest living human being today is 119 years old. So only 10 years prior to that, is when the Hawaiian kingdom was overthrown. In this time, the United States has done what may be irreparable damage to the Hawaiian kingdom. A number of issues have arisen, one of them around water. Prior to colonization, Native Hawaiians believed that water can't be owned. They also had sustainable systems for using water, both for personal use and for farming. But as foreign investors began creating plantations and diverting water, everything changed. And so that leads us to where we are today. in Oahu, the island in which I'm in. The Navy has over 100 million gallons of fuel in 20 tanks in what they call the Red Hill Fuel Storage Facility. 18 of them remain active today. And they were created in the 1940s and have been leaking fuel since the 1940s. In 2014, the storage facility leaked 27,000 gallons of fuel from one single tank. And then this year as well, it has been leaking tremendously this year and the previous year. The military continues to deny that this is a problem, or continued to deny that this was a problem until they could no longer deny it, as military families were actively getting sick. Reports included infants that were vomiting uncontrollably. One of the families had to put their dog down because of how ill it became because of the contaminated water. And the military has been acting as if this is not a problem. The Assistant Secretary, the Navy's Assistant Secretary, did a remote testimony in which he actually complained about missing a football game instead of actually trying to listen to what Native Hawaiians were telling them. Furthermore, these fuel tanks are 100 feet directly above the southern basal aquifer, the primary drinking water source for the island. This aquifer provides water to over 400,000 residents. And so that's the second map that you see right there in the yellowish area. If that aquifer is contaminated, at least that much part of the population will be affected. And they're supposed to be draining the tanks. They are fighting every step of the way. The fuel is supposed to be relocated. And it's impacting residents in many, many ways. Currently, there's development projects that are halting due to lack of water, including but not limited to Queens Medical Center, as well as affordable housing properties. They're asking Hawaiians to conserve water, but they're not curbing tourism. Or golf course use. There's tremendously large golf courses that use a lot of water within the islands. But instead of trying to curb the water usage in other ways, they're asking residents to curb their water usage. This has also happened in Maui, in which recent drought conditions have led the government to put a $500 fine on residents if they use water for non-essential activities, such as washing a car or watering the lawn. However, these water restrictions are once again not being applied to the tourism or to the golf courses. And the number of visits have escalated tremendously. In June 2021, in only that month, there were 260,000 people that visited Maui. The prior year in June, it had only been 2,000 people. So about 258,000 more people came after the pandemic began in one single month in the year prior. The displacement is affecting Hawaiians, not only in terms of water, but so many other ways. 51% of homeless people are Native Hawaiian, despite it only being 10% of the population. And this requires that we ask of ourselves, what does solidarity really look like? As people continue to travel here, or people like myself have become settlers of this land. Native Hawaiians have said over and over and over again, we are not American. And I'm gonna have Emmy play a video, next slide please, from Dr. I'm so sorry, Humanai K. Trask, who was a Hawaiian activist, educator, author, and poet, who was also the leader of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. So this video is from 1993 in front of the Iolani Palace.
We are not American. We are not American. We are not American. Say it in your heart. Say it when you sleep. We are not American. We will die as Hawaiians. We will never be Americans. The American Hawaiians, my people, are our enemies, and you must understand that. They are our enemies. They took our land. They imprisoned our queen. They banned our language. They forcibly made us a colony of the United States. America always says they are democratic. Lies! That is a lie! They have never been democratic with Native people. They have never been democratic with Indians. They have never been democratic with Hawaiians. The United States of America is the most powerful imperialist country in the world. In the world. They control the United Nations.
Thank you, Emmy. And so once again, this begets the question of how do we support our Native people in an actionable way. Next slide, please, Emmy. And so step number one will be to stop traveling to Hawaii. For myself as a settler, I'm planning my move out of this country. I've been grateful for my time here, but as a guest, I understand that it is time for me to leave and create space for Native Hawaiians. Please, if you can, support land-back sovereignty efforts. Here are some organizations that you can plug into and learn more about. Please support the militarization efforts, as well as water protection efforts. So if you want to take a picture of this, it will be really great for you to plug into some of these organizations. I saw a tweet by Joseph Fields that read that the back in land back is an invitation to disabuse yourself of the notion that the land was ever yours in the first place. And so I just want to end this with that quote. So about Race Forward, next slide, please. We are the largest multiracial racial justice organization. We work with government institutions, nonprofit organizations, people in the arts, philanthropy, et cetera, to advance racial justice. We focus on institutional and systemic racism, and we hold ourselves accountable to communities of color. We are solutions oriented. We believe that if we strategize, come together and lift each other up, we can win against racism. And we have a number of products. I'm so sorry, I thought there was a screen share happening, including Colorlines, Facing Race. Facing Race will be happening in November. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. And feel free to send in any sessions that you may want to carry out at Facing Race if you have any ideas of anything that you'd like to do. As far as this webinar, it was created due to the deafening mainstream silence that goes hand in hand with the rising violence that women of color experience. The research is insufficient, but it tells us that in 2016, 5,712 Indigenous women and girls were reported missing, but only 116 were logged by the US Department of Justice Federal Missing Persons Database. As far as Black women, we are the most likely to die at the hands of an intimate partner, followed closely by Native women with the highest second highest incidence rate. When it comes to femme presenting gender non-conforming people, trans feminine people, 96% of trans folk murdered are trans feminine people. And when it comes to Asian women, 68% of anti-Asian hate crimes are perpetuated against Asian women. And so we see that the numbers of the violent hatred that women receive are significantly high, but as harrowing as these numbers are, our government continues to fail us, mainstream media continues to fail us, and it is clear that the current systems only beget more violence. So during this webinar, our goals are to ground us on the imperial and colonial roots of femicide, to highlight the separate needs of our communities, and to uplift solutions that are abolitionist and community-oriented. You are about to hear from 4 powerful leaders who bring experience in organizing, research, narrative, and policy about how to change the issue. I know we're all really looking forward to their perspectives and wisdom on this complicated issue. And after they speak, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So our first speaker will be Siihasin Hope. Siihasin Hope is a Diné Nadle Navajo Spirit femme and Indigenous queer feminist. They graduated from the University of New Mexico in 2019 with a bachelor's degree in Native American Studies. They're a water protector, and they have assisted in the co-founding of the Red Nation, a Native Liberation grassroots organization, as well as Beyond Borders Caucus, which serves as a vehicle for anti-colonial migrant justice organizing. They're going to talk to us about the imperial roots of femicide and the effects it has had on Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Thank you, Siihasin, for joining us. Take it away.
Hi, hello. I didn't realize I was on mute. I'm going to go ahead and first say thank you for having me on this panel with such other wonderful, amazing people. And I'm going to take a second to introduce myself and where I'm from in my language and in the proper protocols that my people have taught me. And so, yeah, it's She'e Siihasin Nazba Yanin Shad Swadichini Nishle Nakai Bashishin Mesclero Pachi Dashiche Nakai Dashinale Akut Ego Naglina Bahinashle do Albuquerque do Tiwa territories do Deneta do Black Mesa Denasha. So hello, my name is Siihasin. I also go by Hope, and I am well, first and foremost, Diné, and I identify as Nagle, which is our designation of Two-Spirit identity within our community. Two-Spirit is kind of considered an umbrella term, and I'm really excited to share with you all a little bit about where that term comes from and the way that my community uses it. But also I wanted to say thank you to Race Forward, as well as all of the other panelists who are here with me today. I am a water protector with the Danu Collective, and an Indigenous women and Two-Spirit collective that is, doing direct action to defend what is sacred, which is our Mother Earth, as well as the life that lives all around us and with us. And as a water protector that was able to become revolutionized, radicalized through Standing Rock back in 2015, to also be able to live on the front lines for the past, I think it's been 10 months now, in Nemewag, as well as in Anishinaabe territories and so-called the US in Minnesota. I'm really, really grateful to be here to be able to shed a little bit of light on some of the different issues impacting Indigenous women and Two-Spirit and trans and queer relatives across the different nations and communities across not just the so-called United States, but also, North America and the Americas. As a water protector, I had the privileges, had the abilities to meet a lot of different organizers, land defenders, water protectors from different communities. And a lot of the violence that I'm sure many people are aware of and that several of the other panelists will be talking about is interconnected with the struggle to defend Mother Earth. And I think that it's really important for people to really sit with where we are at regarding climate change and the climate crises that are impacting our communities. I wanted to share a little bit specifically about the work that I have been doing as a water protector to address the violence between the environment and the extractive industries, and specifically like systems of capitalism that perpetuate violence on Indigenous women, femmes, and queer folk, as well as the land itself. right? I think that oftentimes whenever we talk about the climate struggle, we don't talk about the Indigenous people who have been leading that struggle. We don't talk about the Indigenous women in particular and Two-Spirit relatives who have been paving the way and holding the reins for this struggle. And so that being said, I do want to take a second to thank the Anishinaabe leaders and elders who have greatly impacted the way that I move today, as well as shared with me a lot of the knowledges that I'm going to share with you about the Line 3 struggle and the extractive industries and the MMIW G2ST struggle, which is also known as missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, as well as transgendered people. And that being said, I'm gonna actually go ahead and just jump into Two-Spirit, being that it is an umbrella term that is used to bring together Indigenous people who exist outside of colonial gender binary systems. And so like every tribal community has their own understanding of Two-Spirit people who exist outside of the settler colonial binary that's been forced on our communities. Two-Spirit is an umbrella term, and not all Indigenous people outside of the binary identify as Two-Spirit for a multitude of reasons. In my community that I come from, the Diné community, we have 4 to 6 genders. And I want to also name that the term Two-Spirit came from our Anishinaabe and Ojibwe relatives during the gathering of LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit people. And so it's very much a term that we are using to politicize and to really draw attention to the reality that we live under occupation and under a system that does not represent our values or like even our identities as people. And so oftentimes you have a lot of violence that happens to our communities because there's no system that's tracking or aware even of our existence, because the system is so completely dependent on the white gaze, on settler colonial systems and understandings of identity and gender, biology, etc. And so I just want to say that because of this lack of understanding, because of this lack of acceptance, and I mean, it's very much a part of the settler colonial project to completely eradicate us and our beliefs and our relationships, even with the land, as a means of colonizing and instilling ongoing land dispossession, that a lot of our people slip through the cracks. A lot of our people go what we call missing and murdered all the time. There's not sufficient research or even knowledge on who we are, on our histories, to be able to track what we do. And so, and the way that we exist in our communities. And so something that I wanted to also talk about is extraction and the extractive industry project. As many of you know, might not know, extractive industries have been infringing on the rights of Indigenous people all over the globe. And Indigenous people make up 5% of the population around the globe, but we protect 80% of the biodiversity. In our lifeways, in our practices, in our cultural obligations, we are the solution, quite literally, to what it means to live on this earth in balance. And some beautiful things that I wanted to share a little bit about my really, really great friend who has really paved the way to making space for Native women and Two-Spirit people to be able to fight for the land and the water, and especially the wild rice in Anishinaabe territories, Tara Hauska. Tara is somebody who has really taken the time to support all land defenders and water protectors from all walks of life to be able to join the struggle for Indigenous liberation as well as climate justice. And a quote that I want to share with you all about Tara and the way that Tara, something that she would say a lot on the front lines that really grounded the work that we did is that pipelines leak. That is what they do. And it's important to understand that not only are we talking about contamination that's directly on the land, but we're talking about contamination and violence that is infringed on the people. And so a lot of people, a part of the Line 3 struggle for liberation, are struggling right now against charges and state experiences of state-sanctioned violence in the process of literally stopping a pipeline through direct action. I am a water protector who is facing charges. I know several other water protectors who are facing charges. One example of some of the violence that those people are experiencing is state-sanctioned violence with threat of being incarcerated. In particular, we have water protectors who are looking at felony charges that are looking to incarcerate them for about 14 years. And right now, there is not enough people talking about the struggle we are facing against the court system, against the state, and against the police especially. And so this is very much a part of, the struggle against extractive industries. All of these different facets, there's so many ways that we can talk about the violence that people experience through the creation of extractive industries, whether it's fracking or pipelines. We have man camps that are created that particularly target Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people, as well as people who live in rural communities, with also the desecration of land itself, with the contamination of water, land erosion, the contributions to climate change, etc. I always like to say that pipelines are another kind of bullet through your body and through your communities. And it's really important for people to remember that and to keep political prisoners and people who are fighting for justice, who the state is trying to target using their systems. Keep them in your minds and in your hearts. I would really appreciate for folks to continue to uplift water protectors as they face legal charges, and uplift people who are fighting for the land and fighting to protect the water. And I would really appreciate for people to continue to come to these types of spaces where you can learn more, get more involved in Indigenous community organizing that involves land protection and water protection, because we all need water, and what happens to the land happens to all of our bodies as people who live off of Mother Earth. And so this is a call for everybody and anybody, wherever you are, in all that you do, to join us in fighting for the land and fighting for the water, and also fighting to save and liberate ourselves, because that's very much a part of the struggle. And so there's so much more, and I look forward to being able to share that with folks in future panels and more discussions around water protection and land defense. And please continue to elevate our struggle, as we are seeing a lot of censorship on these platforms, and a lot of people who are not able to get access to what we're doing, whether that's at Line 3, which is now the pipeline has oil flowing through it, or Winnemucca to protect Thacker Pass, to the Trans Mountain Pipeline. There are several different land defense movements happening, and it would be just so great to see more people plug in, because we need people. We're going up against big industries and environmentalists in particular, which oftentimes are led again by Native women and Two-Spirit and queer folks and trans folks. We are being targeted, and we are being disposed of, just like they do the land. And so I am very grateful for this opportunity to talk and to share with you all. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siihasin. We appreciate your time and your knowledge. Thank you for creating the connection between ecocide and the extractive industries, and the way that Mother Earth is being treated with the way that women as a whole are being treated. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Connie Wan. who is the executive director and co-founder of AAPI Women Lead. As part of her work in ending racial and gender-based violence, she leads a national research project on race, gender, and violence. Dr. Wan is a 2020 Soros Justice Fellowship, a former National Science Foundation Fellow, and a recipient of numerous awards, including the 2021 California Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus Excellence in Civil Rights Award. Dr. Wan, can you tell us your thoughts on the rise in the attention around anti-Asian violence, specifically against women? And tell us a little bit about what people are calling AAPI hate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to Race Forward for creating this conversation, this space for 200-something people to join on a weekday. That's pretty impressive. So thank you, Race Forward. Thank you to my co-panelists for also making the time and for your wisdom. And I also want to say thank you to the attendees for joining us today for such an important conversation. I'm on Tongva land in Los Angeles, but traditionally and historically, I am on Chochenyo land in Oakland, California, where I was born and primarily raised. A little bit about the organization that I helped to co-found so that it can contextualize this conversation. Let me do that for a quick bit. So I am the co-founder of AAPI Women Lead. That organization works to end violence against Asian and Pacific Islander women, girls, and non-binary communities through the leadership of our communities, our women, our femmes, our non-binary communities. And we work in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. We operate through an abolitionist and a transformative justice framework and through several programs and projects that I want to also outline for you all. We lead mutual aid projects and fundraisers. We lead healing justice workshops and seminars. And in that, we reclaim our community's traditional healing practices, such as acupuncture, herbal medicine, martial arts, dance, yoga, all of these things that are seen as alternative forms of healing and healing practices have actually been historically traditional to our well-beings. And I want to, kind of emphasize that as a part of our anti-colonial and decolonial frameworks, that we reclaim these traditions as ours and that they are central to us. We also combine them with contemporary forms of healing as a part of our practice as well. In addition to that, we also do self-defense and community defense trainings, often led by women, femme, queer folks. We have martial artists on board, Black belts on board. We do emergency preparedness. So this, community defense and self-defense is very central to our work. We also do community care, conversations around disability justice, around transgender leadership from our women, our girls, across the gender spectrum. We also do a lot of work around research. So in a couple of weeks, we will be launching what we call the Intergenerational Participatory Action Research, which will include 10 different organizations led by Asian and Pacific Islander women, girls, non-binary folks, so that we can actually study from our own community's perspective what constitutes violence. And that is beyond the hate discourse that everyone has been talking about. And then, of course, we lead a conference every year with about 300-something participants. I share that because I want you all to also get a sense of the work that we are doing on the grounds and in social media world and what abolition and transformative justice means for us. And I also say that to tell you all that a lot of violence has been going on in our communities, especially against our women, our girls, and our non-binary communities. In that sense, I'm sure, and I hope that folks have been paying attention to the media as of recent. In the past couple of years, there's been an increase of violence, or at least there's been increased attention around the violence against Asian communities under the discourse of hate. There's also been a lot of violence against our Pacific Islander communities, also under the pretense or under the discourse of hate. Both experiences are quite different and vast. So I want to make sure that we emphasize that our communities are experiencing different forms of violence. In the media, what you see today are kind of interpersonal forms of violence that happen on the streets, that happen when people are shopping, when people are in the parking lots, when people are on the subway trains, when people are going home. There have been a couple of high-profile cases in New York City by which Asian women in particular have been either pushed off the trains, the subway train stops, and subsequently killed. And then there are women who have been followed home and then killed in their apartments. I think it's important to kind of, recognize that these are racialized and patriarchal forms of violence. And then there's also the high profile case of what happened in Atlanta area, by which 8 people were killed across 3 Asian owned massage spas in the Atlanta area. That's 3 spas across many miles. And these killings happened at the hand of a white male who said that he had a sexual addiction. In fact, that day he had gone in for a massage and failed to tip his massage worker. When she asked for her tip, he shot and killed her and 7 other people. 8 people were killed, as I mentioned earlier, 6 of whom were Asian women. They were massage workers. They worked at the front desk. Some were sex workers. And I think that's important because not only was it an issue of race and gender at the intersections, it's also about citizenship, it's also about labor, and it's also about an anti-sex work culture that is often masked or conflated with trafficking. This is also about the fetishization of particular bodies. And in these cases, Asian women's bodies, it's also about the dispensability and the disposability of Asian women, Asian migrant women, and Asian massage workers and Asian sex workers. That happened on March 16th. March 16th also happens to be the anniversary of the My Lai massacre, which took place during the war in Vietnam, by which the US military shot and killed 300 to 500 women and children in My Lai as a part of the US imperialist war. So March 16th is a very important date here in the United States and also abroad in terms of marking the legacy of violence against Asian women in particular, in terms of US domestic warfare and then US imperialist warfare. Now, the violence against our communities, of course, is not limited in that sense. We are talking about wars in the Philippines and occupations in the Philippines all the way from the 1800s. We're talking about the deaths and killings during the wars across Southeast Asia in the 60s and the 70s, in Laos, Cambodia, across Southeast Asia. We're talking about the occupations and the wars in Korea. We're talking about when it comes to our Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaii. We're talking about American Samoa. We're talking about occupations in Guam. We're talking about current occupations in Hawaii, as we heard earlier, right? We're talking about occupations of the Marshall Islands. So there is a long-standing, ongoing history of violence against our communities by which women, girls, femmes, children are the primary victims and survivors. I think that's important for us to note because that history has been invisibilized. And I paused for that because I'm not quite sure if people recognize this longstanding history, as there has been attention to what people call hate. Our organization wants to expand the discourse of hate, or actually work against it to help our communities writ large recognize that the 68% of women who are experiencing hate violence today are also experiencing violence at home and have historically experienced violence across here and overseas. Up to about 80% of us have experienced GBV through war and through our domestic, domestic forms of violence, home here in the United States and also within our home. So I'll talk more about that. I think later there's a few more minutes for us to chat.
Thank you so much, Connie. That was a lot of information. That was really impactful. Thank you for naming the numerous ways in which Asian women are being affected. I'm going to now introduce Dr. Trevor Lindsay. Treva Lindsay, my apologies. Dr. Treva Lindsay is a Black feminist historian and associate professor of women's, gender, and sexuality studies at The Ohio State University. Her latest book, which was published about a week and 2 days ago, is entitled America Goddamn: Violence, Black Women, and the Struggle for Justice. And it explores contemporary violence against Black women and girls and how they mobilize to halt that violence against us. How we mobilize to halt that violence against us. She's a recipient of several prestigious fellowships, including the Mellon Scholars in Society Fellowship, the Equity for Women and Girls of Color Fellowship at Harvard University, and the Woodrow Wilson Career Enhancement Fellowship. Lindsay is the founder of the Transformative Black Feminisms Initiative at Ohio State and the co-founder of Black Feminist Night School at Zora's House in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Lindsay, as a Black woman, something that Connie mentioned and that I feel like most of us probably identify with as women of color, we are hypersexualized. And as Black women, I feel like we exist in a complicated juncture. We're also hypermasculinized, the strong Black woman narrative, and we're also somehow rendered invisible. And that leads to high levels of violence from the state, as well as intercommunally from our own people and our own men, and very few solutions being brought forward. Could you tell us a bit about your findings?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. I am heartened to be in this community of organizers, activists, and thank you for all who are attending, for Race Forward, for having this conversation around race and femicide and thinking about this transnationally, globally, nationally, locally, intimately, interpersonally. This topic, obviously, as someone who wrote a book about it, means a lot to me to talk about honestly. Just to describe myself for anyone who's able to visualize with me, I am a brown-skinned African-American woman with fairly long locks, half up with a bun on top of my head and half coming down, with darker hair and in a pink, kind of rippled, ruffled pink sleeveless dress. I'm currently located in Columbus, Ohio, which is the land that we occupy as the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, the Potawatomi, the Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. Yes, so I'm gonna just read a little bit from my book because I wanted to think a little bit alongside some of what was said today and some of what I wanted to say today, and to bring this into a kind of discussion of the home, which picks up quite intently from the last amazing organizer. So thank you. By the age of 35, I personally knew too many women who were killed by their current or ex-partners. In 2016, a Black woman in the United States was killed by a man every 17 hours. More than 90% of these murders happen intra-communally. While slightly more than 90% of Black women victims of homicide knew their killers, 58% of those who knew their killers were the wives, ex-wives, partners, and ex-partners of those who killed them. Black women are killed by men at more than twice the rate of white women in the United States. One of the key conclusions proffered by the Violence Policy Center in its September 2018 report, When Men Murder Women, an analysis of 2016 homicide data, is that, quote, the disproportionate burden of fatal and non-fatal violence borne by Black females has almost always been overshadowed by the toll violence has taken on Black males, end quote. The report also acknowledges unnamed societal factors contributing to these alarming statistics. Without contextualization and radical honesty, however, the report can feed into existing anti-Black stereotypes about Black men and boys as inherently and uncontrollably violent. The data is just the starting point. It's the unnamed societal factors that unveil important truths about intracommunal violence against Black women, girls, and gender-expansive people. According to a study conducted by Black Women's Blueprint in 2012, between 40 and 60% of Black girls experience some form of sexual violence before turning 18. Slightly more than 40% of Black women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. The national average for all women in the United States is around 30%. One of the most pressing examples of intracommunal violence is the crisis of Black trans women and girls and gender variant people being murdered. 6 Black trans women and girls were found dead over the course of just 9 days in late June and early July 2020 in the United States. By mid-July 2020, 22 trans women and girls had been killed thus far in the year, most of them Black. The year 2020 was one of the deadliest years yet for Black trans women. The perpetrators of these underreported and underinvestigated murders often remain unknown. At the cruel intersection of trans misogynoir and anti-Blackness are the unsolved and largely unknown murders of more than 100 Black trans women in the United States in the 21st century. In 2016, MIC released a database tracking the deaths of transgender homicide victims. Between 2010 and 2016, 75% of the transgender and gender nonconforming people killed were Black trans women. This means that between 2010 and 2016, a Black trans woman was killed every single month. 82 trans people, most of whom were Black women and girls, were killed between 2017 and 2019. And in the first 7 months of 2020, the number of Black trans homicide victims surpassed the total number for 2019. This is what violence against Black women looks like in the 21st century. This is what fatal violence looks like. So how do we fully and justly contextualize what is happening without replicating harmful and criminalizing narratives and tropes about Black people more broadly? And so I wanted to think intently today about the reasons we see these high numbers and the ways in which harm befalls so many Black women, girls, gender nonconforming, gender expansive, and agender people within the home space and spaces we identify as home. So not only talking about the domestic space as just house, but literally the communities and kinship spaces in which we experience violence. What does it mean to experience violence at the hands of those we love and those we feel accountable to in a broad struggle of justice against white supremacy, colonial violence, imperialist violence, capitalism, and other forms of injustice? And notably, when we think about police and state violence, Black women often are facing fatal violence in their homes, in the invasion of the state, that a number of the known deaths of Black women by police in the United States occurred in the home. One need only think of Breonna Taylor, asleep in her bed, Ayanna Stanley Jones, asleep on her grandmother's couch during a botched drug raid that left her murdered. One can think of a Tatiana Jefferson playing video games with her nephew in Texas when a cop thinks she's an intruder in her own home and kills her in her own home. Or Deborah Danner in New York, who's killed during a mental health episode at her home in New York. Tanisha Anderson in Cleveland, Ohio, killed in front of her family, in front of her home, also for a call for mental health distress. So at the intersection of ableism, anti-Blackness, and misogynoir, Again, we see the home as this volatile space, the house as this volatile space, as this death-dealing space for Black women and girls. In fact, the language that we have that is used to describe police violence against people broadly across race, ethnicity, and class stems from the murder of a Black woman. You may be familiar with the term officer-involved shooting. It is the most passive and deeply offensive term one can use, as one doesn't know how the officer was involved when we name that and say officer-involved shooting. And if you are under the guise that the criminal punishment system and policing are necessary, then officer involved often indicates to people that the officer was both justified and or the victim of this crime. But this term became popularized after police killed Eula Love in Los Angeles in her own yard over an unpaid gas bill. Shot at close range, this murder set off a set of events by which in 2022, we still use that term to erase the victimhood of Black women. And so as was mentioned earlier, it is both in that erasure of the victimization that Black women endure, both fatally and non-fatally, but assuredly with violence, as well as the existing tropes, criminalizing tropes and stereotypes that lead to a climate of anti-Black violence that is gender specific in its terrorizing, in its devouring, in its appetite for Black life. And so I call upon us to be committed to this struggle for justice, to understanding the gravity and the stakes of this violence, and understanding the multitude of forms in which it happens, and looking to our homes, our communities, our fictive homes, our real homes, our connections to homes, as ways to begin undoing and imagining anew relationships, intimacies, and our war against the state and state violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Treva. That was so powerful. I wanted to snap my fingers numerous times. Thank you so much. Next, I'm gonna introduce Angela Marie Mcdougal. Angela has been doing this work for over 19 years through her community-based organizing, frontline work activism. She has been deeply involved in movements for social justice. Her impact includes the development of empowerment and advocacy-based program and service delivery models that address gender-based violence and violence against women that are grounded in strong theoretical frameworks that include feminist trauma-informed analysis. Angela has edited and written or written 10 manuals on addressing gender-based violence and violence against women from an intersectional, anti-oppression, feminist framework, and has spoken to hundreds of groups throughout Canada, the United States, and in China. Angela, thank you so much for joining us. As an immigrant woman myself, I really would love to hear your thoughts on how migration affects women and the violence that begets, as well as how men are being radicalized through this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join today. It means a lot to be here with you all. It's a true honor, and I'm so grateful for the team at Race Forward for convening us today, and for all the incredible panelists sharing your wisdom and your experience and your scholarship. It matters so much for our shared interest and vision for a world that is more just and is about restoring balance that we know our people have known for centuries prior to colonization. My name is Angela Marie Mcdougal, and I go by the name of the pronouns she and her. I am here for those that aren't able to see me today. I'm wearing a black hoodie that's a little bit shiny. I have a black beanie, which if you're in Canada, you might call that a toque. And I've got headphones on as well. I'm a biracial Black woman, which means I'm light skinned, and I have copper braids that have tragically grown out of my to the point which my braider will no longer claim me, I am sure. I am here in the unceded and ancestral territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people in a country that is now called Canada. And my ancestors don't come from this land. My ancestors are here by way of Western Africa and Northern Sweden. And I have the extraordinary privilege to be able to work to end gender-based violence and to ground that in strong theoretical understandings and practices around femicide in the city of Vancouver. And alongside a powerful team of deeply committed frontline workers and policy and research analysts, as well as an incredible community that has been deeply galvanized around addressing violence and gender-based violence from the point of view of a profound and deep understanding of colonization. I want to talk about colonization in the question about migration, but also to echo what I've heard here today, and that Canada is a country that was colonized. The country came to be as a result of colonization by England and France. And through that process of colonization, which was a process that we know was all over the globe. In fact, 84% of the world's land mass was colonized by European power by the beginning of the 20th century, which is to say, deeply and profoundly impacted by European values and by governance structures and ways of commerce, but baked in specific kinds of understandings and framings with respect to gender and race. And this is why when I talk about Canada, we cannot talk about femicide without talking about colonization in a country like Canada. And I heard our dear friend speak earlier about the role of resource extraction, and we've been making those connections about that the issue is the land. And Canada is a country that you may not know holds 3/4 of the headquarters of the world's mining companies, and that Canada has been deeply and profoundly a factor, both in terms of colonization, but also and imperialism, but also around racial capitalism and the source of in the way of resource extraction, and that within the resource extraction, we know that there is a profound and deep relationship to femicide, and that the global accumulation of wealth that was started, certainly, of course, with the genocide of Indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans, continues in present day with resource extraction and baking in a kind of gendered violence that is about the land, most definitely, and also about the humans and other species that occupy the land. And I'm here in a city that has been ground zero for a number of battles around pipelines, and the battles that we've had here in this city, but also throughout the country, have been around trying to seek some balance and redress the impacts of resource extraction and femicide. And through our work in Vancouver, we have, as a direct service organization, we are responding to around 32,000 requests during the pandemic, which means that we have seen a lot of regression, in a sense, of the social safety net, if you will, the kind of ways in which we might have believed that gender equity was being forwarded. And as an organization that serves multiracial, multi-ethnic, all ages, we've worked really closely around thinking about the intersection of misogyny and racialized violence. And that means that we not what we've heard already today is the deep and profound ways in which trans women, trans feminine people are on the front line of violence, and especially those who are quoted as Black. And I'm in a city that has, like a lot of cities around the globe that have sought to dispossess people of land, Vancouver was successful actually in dispossessing Black people of a neighborhood. And that Black people in Canada and in Vancouver specifically have experienced particular kinds of dispossession and invisibility while being hyper visible. And our work at my organization, the organization that I work for, we have sought very much in ensuring that there are services for those that seek support. We think that that's really important, but not services from the point of view of services that would meet individuals' needs that would be above and beyond what we might anticipate, which is to say that we are critical of the police. We are critical of the ways in which the criminal legal system is not a remedy. And we are been very, very profoundly impacted by the effects of the amount of violence that we see all across Canada. One of the things that I think in thinking about in resource extraction and to the question about migration, is that in Canada, we are stratified along racial lines as well as gender and as well as immigration status. And as a country that was colonized, as I mentioned before, by England and France, that for many of the people that we see that are dealing with violence and in our communities here and all across the country, that there is a criminalization of people who aren't coded as white, and especially those who are Black and Indigenous. And it should not surprise anybody that when we heard earlier about the amounts of violence against Indigenous women, Canada has been very much pointing to the effects of colonization in Indigenous communities all across this land, and the amount of violence that Indigenous women experience that is reinforced and perpetrated by the state. Melania Labakane Massimo makes the statement that violence against women begets violence against the land begets violence against women. And when she makes that statement, she's commenting certainly on the ways in which the racial capitalism has been deeply and profoundly a part of the making of Canada as a nation. And when we are thinking about how to take action, we've been working for quite a while now, and it's coming together in a way that we're happy to make visible, is the ways in which violence is racialized within Canada. And we're in a process right now of unpacking here within the area that I'm in, unpacking the racialized violence, the amount of criminalization that Indigenous and Black survivors experience by police, and that there continues to be a lack of a safety net, continues to be a lack of an approach that would secure and ensure safety, and that we've wanted deeply and profoundly to draw attention to those factors and to redress those factors, both in terms of thinking about what justice means, thinking about what safety means. Safety means in a country like Canada that has been profoundly exploitive and has profoundly created deep inequities for Black and Indigenous survivors specifically. And I was quite kind of impacted listening to Dr. Treva speak, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. But speaking about the ways in which racist misogyny is in effect and grinding down the lives of Black women, and to the extent to which that we see ourselves as understanding that there are women within a country like Canada that are deemed by the state and by others as deserving of protection by the state, and women that are not. And so that is in part what we seek to redress each and every day. And that includes thinking about those that are here in Canada as migrants. I think I look around the globe and see the where recent migrants and those who are newcomers to Canada are coming from, and can track the imperialist undertakings by Canada and other places. Canada has been given a lot of cover by the United States, in a sense, because of how dramatic the white supremacy and violence is. And Canada has been kind of in the shadows to the extent to which there continues to be so much inequity and state violence. And so when I look around the world and see how many newcomers and migrants that are coming from many places, including many countries in Africa, in Latin America, and I can track where there are Canadian mining companies, for example, where we see that the role of colonization that is then transformed into colonization as well as imperialism, and understanding that when people are arriving in a place like Canada are seeking a kind of safety and are then stratified even more profoundly by the laws that will dispossess those who are here as temporary foreign workers, for example, the laws and the policies that then would prohibit migrants from Africa or Latin America or other parts of the world to access transition houses, to access safe spaces because of not having immigration status or precarious immigration status, and combined with the fact that we see that police and more broadly the state who are criminalizing survivors here, both in the city of Vancouver, but also throughout Vancouver, throughout the province, and as well as other parts of the country. And so I join with each and every one of you today who is seeking a kind of justice that would be about redressing the harms, most definitely, but transforming a future that is first and foremost telling the truths about the inequity, about the story of colonization. I think it's mightily important for us to dig into that history, to understand even the creation of race, which we know is a social construct, and for that matter, the creation of gender, which if we think about it in many places that are deeply and thinking about the spectrum of gender and how it came to be a binary. And I look forward, of course, to how we can link arms across borders, across territories, and across land and water to seek justice and to seek safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. So we've heard from our panelists so far. Siihasin grounded us on how violence against Indigenous women, femmes, and queer folk is connected with the struggle to defend Mother Earth. Connie spoke about the racialized and gendered violence that Asian women experience and how it's about immigration as well as sex work and the disposability of Asian women, and how it's not just interpersonal. We have to look at wars and occupations. It's a long-standing, ongoing history of violence against Asian communities that has been invisibilized. Treva spoke about what it means to experience violence at the hands of those we love, violence by the state, violence in our own homes, and the intersection of ableism, anti-Blackness, misogynoir, trans-misogynoir. And Angela Marie Mcdougall connected the linking across borders, territories, land and water to seek justice and safety, and how migrant women are escaping, are trying to get to a better place, but end up being racialized as well. And so now we want to touch on solutions. We want to touch on what can we do. If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A and we'll be relaying them to the panelists. The first one that I would like to ask, we have heard from leaders speaking from your experiences in different communities. How do we move in solidarity across our communities in addressing racialized, gender-based violence and murder? For anybody that would like to respond. We can also give it some time if you guys want to think about it more. If you at any point, would anybody like to speak? I thought I saw somebody unmuting. No? So I'll go ahead and move on to the next question, but if at any point you would like to answer it, please feel free to jump in and answer it. For Connie, I would like to know, you named reframing violence against women from hate-centered. Can you say more about that, please?
Okay, sorry, I was trying to take off the mute button. So I appreciate the question. What I was talking about when I am imploring us to think beyond and perhaps even against the discourse of hate is one, it doesn't get to the levels of violence and the various types of violence that our communities experience. So for instance, the state violence and the wars against our communities, particularly women, femmes, non-binary communities, does not constitute hate. That is racial, gendered, patriarchal violence. That's homophobic, that's transphobic, that's a level of violence that is also structural, right? Structural violence is not indicative of hate. Structural violence is violence onto itself, and structural violence is for the purposes of, at some points, it is for power, for the sake of gaining power, but it's also to, at times, it's a genocidal project. It is one to eviscerate. It is one to destroy and extract from. And I would not call that hate, right? The institutional violence that our communities experience through, let's say, incarceration, through lack of language services, through deportation and detention, those are forms of violence, right? We would not call that hate. And if we did, we probably should not, right? So I want to kind of emphasize that. And then I also want, so to kind of paraphrase that, what I'm saying is that hate does not get to the layers and the levels of violence that our communities experience, especially at the intersections. And then I want to say that the hate discourse is one that is popularized and is utilized by the criminal justice system. So very often, and the criminal justice system in relationship with very big nonprofit organizations that have vested interests in working with the criminal justice system and law enforcement. So the hate crime discourse and the hate discourse has a purpose by which it is to, I would argue, it is to legitimize the state. And if we see the state as a primary perpetrator and co-conspirator of violence, if not the main arbiter of violence, then I would say we do not need to legitimize the state, but instead we need to see the state as a perpetrator of violence, right? So we don't need to say, hey, state, can you call this a hate crime for us? Because we actually don't care what the state says, because we know the state is a perpetrator of violence. I'm not gonna say, hey, state, recognize me. I'm gonna say, state, you caused some harm. We're gonna need to do away with that, right? And because this is recorded, I'm not actually going to say what I would love for the state to do with itself or for us to do with it, right? But I think it's important for us to move away from using the state's language, because it then like I said, it legitimizes the state, and then it discounts the type of violence that the state enacts. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, that was perfect. And it actually cues me up into my next question. I love how you explained that the hate individualizes the problem instead of talking about the larger problem as the state focused. What are systemic level solutions that you feel comfortable sharing that we could fight for or work for to address this issue?
And is that for all of us?
Yes, I would love for you to respond as well if you'd like to respond, but anybody that would like to respond as well. Anybody else?
I think systemically, and I'm going to be, very transparent. So I have long adopted abolitionist practices and principles. And what that means for me is that we have to abolish the systems and the world that we currently live under. And I purposely use the word under, right? If this world is built upon anti-Blackness, if is rhetorical, because it is built upon anti-Blackness and because it is built upon anti-indigeneity across the globe, then all of its policies and practices have been to uphold that world, right? That then means that at a structural level, we need to get rid of it. And we have to have that lens, an abolitionist lens that recognizes we need to end a world that is anti-Black. We need to end a world that is anti-Indigenous. We need to end a world that is patriarchal, right? We need to end a world that is transphobic. We need to end these worlds. That means that we have to critique its policies and practices from that framework. So we start there, is to adopt a framework that lets us see all the policies and practices that upholds it, right? That also then means that we work within the community, I would say, such that our communities are well-resourced. So if we are to have systems in place, that those systems are to protect and to provide resources for our communities to rely on each other, to take care of each other, such that we are very well-resourced. Right? And that goes back to the question around solidarity. We do that in relationship to one another. We take care of each other, right? And we understand the privileges that we all have and the resources that we have, such that we share them. And then also, in large part, there may be some resources that we need to disavow, which then goes back to the point of land back. If our Indigenous folks say, give the land back, well, then many of us are going to have to give the whole land back. Right? If that means we have to go and find another place to live, then we're going to have to do that together. Right? If our Indigenous folks, well, you could stay here, but you can only have this if you help us, with the irrigation, then let's do that all together. Right? If Black folks say stop extracting from our bodies, then we're just going to have to stop doing that. Right? I think that's very, very important for us to recognize and to listen to one another as we build resources and communicate with one another accordingly. I hope that made sense, because that was a big question.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Connie. I just want to echo that the practices of divestment, and also as an abolitionist, and thinking about what we have to do to divest from the extractive, what we have to do to divest from the colonizing, what we have to do to divest from the criminalizing impulses and our penchant for responding to things like safety, like harm, by relying upon the same systems and structures that death deal harm to us every day. And that requires that kind of connection to these practices of extraction, of colonizing and criminalizing and devaluation that are happening all around, right? They are predicated upon different and specific histories with which we need to study with rigor, but we also need to understand that the practices that we're affirming are life-affirming practices that are about other worlds being possible. And that requires an investment in imagination. It requires an investment in us and a belief in us that we are life-affirming and these systems are death-dealing. And so our consistent engagement, whether that be the criminal legal system, whether that be in the US, thinking about the Supreme Court, when I say abolish it, I mean all of the ways that regulate and police us into these binaries, to this rigidity, and to death-dealing systems that predispose so many of us and our marginalized communities, exploited and extracted communities, into premature death. That in many ways we are become co-conspirators along with this organized abandonment when we invest in these systems. And so the requirement for systemic change is a large-scale divestment that does begin with these connective solidarities, that is about intimate and hard-fought solidarities, because these conversations aren't easy. stand back conversations aren't easy. To tell people that we need to do certain things regarding anti-Blackness, these are not easy because we have learned this. And so that process of being an abolitionist for me is one that I am constantly a student and learning and growing in that, and learning all of the ways that I've invested in carceral logics, that I've invested in colonizing logics and criminalizing logics. And so divesting from those to actually be able to imagine anew, to imagine otherwise possible. And that collective imagination is one of the most radical, and by radical here, I mean at the root, at the core, getting to the root of, to the core of means it's an upending and an ending of worlds to actually create and facilitate new worlds being birthed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I may jump in to say, to kind of echo that, and to say that the challenge that we see in with responding to survivors that are dealing with violence on an individual basis, and knowing that their experiences are within a context, of course, that is deeply violent, and it's not only about the individuals, but also about the context, is the ways in which the community is also a resource, but the community can also be a risk. And so the challenge is how we, and this is what we walk every day, in the sense of the family being a resource, but a risk, the community being a resource, but a risk. And so, navigating all of those spaces and places, while we see survivors are often deeply and profoundly isolated for all kinds of reasons that are complex. And so that is, while we're dreaming and working and imagining this, I know that each and every day on that front line, there's on the front line of femicide, and we've had far too many femicides here in Canada. And of course, I look at the US and other places, and it's jarring actually to see the amount of, of killings that are happening in terms of male violence and femicide. So this is the challenge in being a resource for individuals, and while also challenging the state and divesting from systemic hierarchies that have that contribute and to kill us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Siihasin, it seems like you might want to add something.
Yes, thank you. Wow, that was very, very beautiful. Thank you all for adding that. And I feel like something that I just want to add on that I feel like is really important to a lot of this work that is oftentimes forgotten about when we talk about, like organizing our peoples and, advocating for the relatives who are oftentimes most marginalized and those who experience a lot of violence, heightened violence, and as well as naming the system for exactly what it is and what it was intended to do by its literal creation, which is to colonize and kill and capitalize off of. And then to spread that, I think, is really important analysis, because it's something that, in my experience, a lot of people are just starting to talk about that, but that many other people around the world have been doing and have been fighting, like the extractive industries that have polluted and contaminated the world to create the system in which we have relatives who have to migrate from their homelands because their homelands are contaminated and no longer able to sustain life. Like talking about this bigger structure and system, as you see, like the United States, like in cahoots with Canada and in cahoots with the global North to perpetuate harm on all of their people, oftentimes that exists. We are just seen as laborers. We are just seen as, disposable in a lot of ways if we are not able to produce capital for the colonizer in some way or aspect. And for me, I think it's really, really refreshing to hear all of the different ways that people are engaged in organizing in their communities and in the communities that they're based out of. And I feel like I would really love to see more of that. And it's so affirming to be in a space where we are talking about what that means and what that looks like. And something that I've been trying to like gather and reflect on over the past few months as I've been transitioning from like a frontline camp called the Mewa camp, where I lived with several other hundreds of people who like-minded, you know, engaged in direct action to confront an extractive industry, and used our bodies to put a literal like stop blockade to these industries, to stealing our lives and stealing the lives of wild rice and stealing the lives of all life, as well as the desecration of the land. And also like being able, transitioning into a space where I'm currently at is in Tewa territories, which is also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the Southwest, where you had the creation of like the nuclear colonial industry and all of the different other industries that are involved in not only colonizing what's like life within the United States, but also participating in this Imperial project to perpetuate that same harm and use like biological warfare against other life across the globe in the name of capital and profiting. Right? I think that like there's a lot of different issues that are going on, and it's important to give space to talk about all of them, because it's something that I feel like they don't want us to do, right? They don't want us to reach like those inside our community who are you know, considered, I guess, like labor is disposable. I think that oftentimes a lot of our people get sidetracked in this everyday struggle for survival. And like something that is a part of like my praxis is really understanding the material conditions of the people in my community and doing work, like using any lever I can pull to like advocate for them and to get them access to material support, as well as like hoping and trying to like politicize and theorize about like with them what is happening to us and how we are dying and going missing on a weekly basis, and how people who we loved and cared for are experiencing hardship, whether it be because the system is ableist and is really profiting off of the life and death of members who are not able to like produce, members of like my family or community who are not able-bodied, or don't have like specific skills that are considered marketable, right? I think that it's really frustrating to try and figure out this like how to organize and gather the peoples, I guess you could say, when life is so intense all the time. And so to be able to like take a step back, because I think it's really easy, sorry, my cat's also talking, but like to just take a step back and remember and remind ourselves and to ground ourselves in the fact that the system was intended to like really, really attack us and to kill us and to extract as much as they can from us and our bodies is important. And it's all the more reason it's important to be, you know, working together and to be advocating for each other and our liberations, and seeing them tied to one another and figuring out how to undo all of the conditioning that we have been forced to endure to survive, right? Because I think that, you know, I feel like it's really important for people within my community to talk about anti-migrant sentiments and anti-Blackness that is rampant in our spaces, and really, really infringe on the solidarity that needs to be built in order to take down this big machine. And I would love to see more of it. And so I just really appreciate so much of like folks' experiences in their communities and the organizing work that they're doing, because I feel like we don't hear it enough. And I think that we need to continue to create spaces like this to be able to do these exchanges more often.
Thank you, Siihasin. I think your cat was emphatically agreeing with you. I deeply apologize to all of the panelists and the attendees. We're a little bit past time. I would like to ask one last question, and if you guys have the time, just answer really quickly, one sentence. It's actually gonna be two questions, and you guys can choose which one you answer. One is, what are community-based solutions that we can engage in? And the other one is, what does liberation and freedom as a woman look like to you? So really quickly, answer whichever one you prefer, or both. All right, I think that we've reached our time. I think that our panelists need their time back. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel very, very honored to have you here sitting with us. I feel very honored to have been able to lead this conversation. Thank you to the attendees. Thank you to the Race Forward team. And goodbye, everyone. We will be posting the recording for everybody to watch afterwards. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.